This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
I didn't like the script. So yeah, I signed up naive and went off to Pinewood to be sodomized ritualistically for 2 years.
He would have to get on the phone like at midnight and talk to the brass at Fox, and they'd be saying, don't shoot the next day.
It's impressive as hell to look at, but at the end of the day, you really need to invest an audience with a reason to care.
We never had a concrete draft of a script.
Unfortunately, you're following in the footsteps of Cameron and Ridley's. Tough shoes to fill.
I hope someone goes to see this movie.
With the success of Aliens in 1986, 20th Century Fox was feeling good about the franchise and wanted another film, and approached Brandywine, the company behind the previous 2 films, to start making the sequel. While there was some enthusiasm for the idea of a follow-up, the company's top brass were concerned about an Alien 3 just being a rehash of the originals, something they wanted to avoid. This led to a years-long process of multiple script drafts and varying storylines. This lengthy process began with David Giler and Walter Hill putting their heads together to come up with some ideas. Some early suggestions included a Blade Runner-style hunt through a cityscape, with the xenomorphs taking the place of the replicants, or a monster movie where the xenomorphs invade Earth, merging together into a giant Godzilla-style monster. Another concept involved the Weyland-Yutani Corporation from the previous films facing a war with separatist socialist space colonists, and the xenomorphs being used as a kind of bioweapon in an escalating arms race. A return from Ridley Scott was also suggested, as he was interested in making a film about the origins of the xenomorphs' home planet and origin story. But after Scott wasn't able to commit to the project, director Renny Harlin was planning to carry it on, but the idea was dropped due to concerns over the cost. This is the concept that decades later became Scott's film Prometheus. Ripley was for the most part left out of these early ideas, and Sigourney Weaver found herself actually agreeing with this, suggesting Ripley was going to become a burden to the story, given that her character arc had been completed in Aliens, and so it was suggested that some kind of excuse would be made for Ripley to be absent from the narrative, only appearing briefly as a tie-in to a planned 4th film, which could potentially be shot back-to-back with Aliens 3, a filming practice that was at the time very rare. By 1987, their initial confidence that the 2 films could be made at once fell through, when it seemed like a writer's strike was looming, and so Giler and Hill dropped the back-to-back idea and decided to focus solely on Alien 3, looking to writer William Gibson to deliver a script. This concept picked up on the war concept suggested in the early brainstorms, with the biowarfare efforts of the 2 factions causing a catastrophic outbreak that the survivors have to unite with Hicks to stop. With Ripley left in stasis alongside the other survivors of Aliens, once again, there was going to be a major focus on action. Gibson barely got the script in right before the writer's strike began in December 1987, but Giler and Hill decided they weren't happy with it. Gibson had essentially delivered exactly what the original Cold War concept called for, and the duo decided they wanted something more experimental. Gibson was asked to work with Renny Harlin on a rewrite, but wasn't happy with the idea and decided to quit, moving on to other projects when the strike was sorted out. The concept was eventually adapted into an audiobook many years later.
Unauthorized trespass. Probable cause. Enemy action.
And so, the studio looked for yet another writer, bringing in Eric Red, and this draft turned out to be even more of a mess than the first one, with Red stating that Giler and Hill had no idea what they wanted, no story, and no plan, with Giler sniping back by saying that Red's work was absolutely dreadful. He turned in his draft in February 1989, and it was rejected. He ended up calling it utter crap and disowning it. Giler and Hill resorted turning back to Gibson's script, hiring David Twohy to revitalize it.
This act marks the end of the old Soviet Union, signified today by Mikhail Gorbachev's decision to resign as president.
By this point, the Cold War and the era of communism was coming to a close, rendering the main concept obsolete. So Twohy decided to rewrite the script to change the setting to a prison colony, eliminating the militant separatists from the plot. This new edition had good reception, but when it was presented to the president of Fox, Joe Roth, it was rejected because Ripley was missing from the story. Even though the whole concept of a back-to-back Aliens 3 and 4 had been dropped, Ripley hadn't been added back into the narrative, and so Twohy had to rewrite the script again to make her the film's protagonist once again. This new version lost the enthusiasm of Rennie Harland, who quit his role as the director, forcing Fox to look for a replacement, that replacement being Vincent Ward. But Ward found himself unimpressed with Twohy's script and decided to come up with his own concept, with the alien rampaging through a wooden space satellite setting populated by monks. Fox hired Ward as the director and recruited writer John Fasano to help realize the concept, but both scripts ended up collapsing. Twohy quit after discovering Ward was working on another version of the film, feeling conned by Fox, while Ward ended up dropping the project as the studio expected its delivery to be pushed forward and got cold feet over the concept, leaving Brandywine and Fox once again with no script, no director, and no writer. Today's sponsor, Squarespace, has just updated to Squarespace 7.1 with its Fluid engine and newly added Blueprint AI and SEO tools. It's the easiest way to get a professional website for your business up and running for anyone who doesn't have a lot of time to, mess around with complicated coding. The new Blueprint AI system helps build your website from the ground up, tailoring it to your specific business and industry. And instead of having to install a bunch of SEO plugins so people will actually see your site, the new optimized SEO tools will help launch your site and get seen fast, with integrated and optimized SEO tools that will help your website grow fast. So head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial to test out these awesome new features. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/FrameVoyager to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code FrameVoyager. In the middle of this process, director David Fincher would be recruited to bring this project to life. This would be his debut film, and he was a massive fan of the Alien franchise as well.
And when it came to the first feature, Alien 3, did you think, right, this is the ideal project for me?
Yeah, I really did.
I wanted to do an Alien movie. I wanted to do one since I was 16. I felt like I had a relationship to Dan O'Bannon's side of it, as well as the Walter Hill side of it, as well as the H.R. Giger side of it. I felt like I kind of knew what I would do with that.
We wanted to, once again, to go with a director that did not have an established track record per se, but we thought was going to be a major director in the years to come.
With Fincher signed, he would work on his own version of the screenplay with writer Rex Pickett. Rex Pickett would then get fired, and Fox would hire writer Larry Ferguson to do a 4-week emergency rewrite of the script of Fincher's plot. They said, my God, this is 4 fucking hours. It's $150 million. And they were absolutely right. Fincher said, I was just so taken with the legacy that it had to be Apocalypse Now. But Fincher and the studio did not like what Ferguson had done to the script, with Fincher even mocking it, saying, in the draft Larry was writing, she was going to be this woman who had fallen from the stars. In the end, she dies, and there are 7 monks left. 7 dwarves. Seriously, I swear to God. And in the end, there were these 7 dwarves left, and there was this fucking tube they put in her, and they were waiting for Prince Charming to come wake her up. So that was one of the endings we had for this movie. After Ferguson turned in the script, Fox would reluctantly agree to pay $600,000 for another rewrite, this time going back to none other than Hill and Giler. Hill and Giler finally resorted to writing the final script themselves, mashing the 2 previous scripts together in an emergency rewrite, using Ward's script as a base while replacing the wooden space station with the prison colony from Twohy's version, making the prisoners, as Giler would say, your basic militant Christian fundamentalist, millenarian, apocalyptic types. When they turned it in, the studio liked it, but Fincher of course had problems with it, and the fight between him and the studio would be an omen of how this film would turn out.
I made a crucial error. I listened to the people who were paying for the movie, and they said the way to go about this is not to work with your friends. The way to go about this is to work with people who've done this time and time and time again.
Hill would recall the period being brutal, a real battle royale, with budgets getting slashed, scripts constantly changing, and days for filming getting reduced. It was setting up to be a hellish production. which we of course will talk about later on in this video.
My first movie, it's fairly well known, was a disaster. I stupidly felt that the people who were financing it had more to lose than I did. I sort of allowed myself to be steered into this communal making, and then when the shit hits the fan, all of a sudden everybody scatters and you're the guy standing there going, wait, who's got a suggestion now?
Outside London, on the lot of world-famous Pinewood Studios, Sigourney Weaver, director David Fincher, and crew worked toward completion of the new movie that would take an already classic series to yet another level. The movie is Alien 3.
Principal filming for Alien 3 would begin on January 14th, 1991 at Pinewood Studios without a finished script and $7 million already spent. To make matters worse, their cinematographer, Jordan Cronenweth, would only shoot for about 2 weeks before his health deteriorated. He would later be diagnosed, sadly, with Parkinson's disease. He would be replaced by cinematographer Alex Thompson. Finally getting into the production after the hard creative road to get there. And let's just be honest, the hard creative road's not over. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Fincher later on and the craziness, but let's maybe focus on some cool things that Alien 3 did. For Alien 3, the team needed an alien that the viewers had never seen before, an alien that ran on all fours. This alien would be a considerable challenge, especially because the film was created years before Star Wars Episode 1 hit theaters. Digital effects could be described as somewhat immature at this point, leaving the effects team to somehow do it for real. Soon, it turned out that a whole new compositing workflow had to be developed to make the quadrupedal alien come to life, and the results certainly speak for themselves. Puppeteering such an alien was a tremendous task. It required multiple puppeteers to navigate the alien around. A few people for the hind and forelegs, someone for the tail, and someone else to move the alien's head, not including everyone else that operates the cameras and dollies on set.
A lot of this movie is going to be a third scale puppet. I mean, in fact, we're hoping that most of the time that you see the creature, it's going to be the puppet, because it's just got things to it that you can't do with a man in a suit.
The alien puppet was always shot in front of a blue screen, of which the footage was later composited on the top of the shot of an actor defending themselves against the alien. You bastard! This brought difficulties, especially when trying to correctly match the movement of the alien when it would take its victim off set. The actor's movement had to also be choreographed to a certain extent in order to harmonize with the alien's attacks in the final composite in the end. The guy in a rubber suit was also used for Alien 3, but for the most part, the team resorted to using the puppet. But they still had to figure out how to move the puppet convincingly. An obvious thought would be to use stop motion, but there's a problem with stop motion. The characters' movements are robotic, more jagged, to the point where the nature of stop motion's artifacts can also be a problem for robotic characters.
You can't have a character running in the scene without the natural motion blur that you'd expect to see. It's because it looks herky-jerky.
For this novel idea, they employed Lane Liska, who was the lead puppeteer for Alien 3, and who also worked on the very first Star Wars movie years ago.
He was very good at stop-motion animation, and we wanted to take the idea of that and use that with rod puppeting.
Instead of posing the puppets and photographing them frame by frame, for this movie, they would rod puppeteer them the entire time. To get usable footage, the team hooked up a camera and even the puppeteers performing the alien to motion-controlled rigs. And all the actions of the alien are performed while both the camera and puppet masters are in motion. This basically eliminated Alien 3's major point of concern. The alien now moves fluidly without any jagged motion, hiccups, and with natural in-camera motion blur. However, figuring out how the alien has to be moved is only part of a complicated puzzle. Just how can the motion-controlled cameras replicate the motions of the live-action shot footage? Just winging it would definitely not be a good solution. The results would turn out way too mismatched. Luckily, there was a very smart solution.
We shot live-action footage in the tunnels and in all the sets back in England with what we called a field recorder dolly that Boss Film had made.
Using this custom-built camera rig, every action from every person on this rig was recorded and then played back on the blue screen set when the alien's motions had to be captured. All that was now needed was to figure out how the alien would be moved through the set by approximating its range of movements on a smaller stage, by analyzing what lenses and field of views were used, and making some space to make the third-scale puppet come to life.
It's going to be a rod puppet that's composited through a blue screen, so you will have more control over the movement, and we'll be able to go in and remove control rods frame by frame, rotoscoping things out, and really getting some control over the movement that way.
Fincher wasn't going to buy locked off shots. I mean, not in these kind of ferocious scenes. And so we designed the system that we could pan, tilt, dolly, boom, all these things.
What is also very handy is the system that allowed the crew to scale down the recordings to a 1/3 scale, matching the dimensions of the Alien model. The VFX studio that created the motion control dolly was Boss Film Studios, which sadly is not around anymore, and they were responsible for the effect work of some big hits in the 80s, such as Ghostbusters, making use of optical processes. Boss Film Studios was a notable studio in the world of pre-digital effects, and they closed their doors before the millennium shift, signifying that times were changing for the VFX scene. As it turns out though, Boss also developed and used a compositing system making use of Laserdisc technology. With this technology, they could essentially preview scenes on the fly.
We could take the material that was shot at 1 frame a second or 48 frames a second and reconfigure that to 24 frames a second so that we could then put it with the background.
The Laserdisc composite system was able to interpolate any recordings to the desired frame rate that Alien 3 was using. So a 1 frame rate per second animation could be interpolated to 24 frames, and a 48 frame per second animation can be interpolated to 24 frames. This system meant that any experiments on set could be reviewed rather quickly, making the effects process easier for everyone involved. In a time before excessive use of CG environments, matte painting was used quite a lot to achieve certain effects. For a variety of scenes, the matte paintings were used to serve as a backdrop, like for instance in the aforementioned Planet Vista. For matte paintings to be good, incredibly skilled artists who were able to use a variety of tools in order to create stunning, realistic landscapes are a must. These landscapes almost look like CG environments and can even be imbued with their own special effects. Take for instance ultraviolet paints. Those paints, when illuminated with an ultraviolet lamp, light up wherever they've been used. All practical, all on camera, no CGI needed. It's cool, but where do computer-generated effects actually appear? You take a look at the scene here. The matte painting may be a practical prop, but the lighting this time was not achieved by using special paints or lamps, but by inverting the color in certain areas of the recorded image digitally. There was a glowing effect that could be observed in the sky, making it look like the EEV is illuminating the clouds as it is falling through. It's a small thing, but the effect is remarkably convincing. Now, a shot that looks dated by today's standards, but which was quite good for the time, was around the second long shot of the alien turning its head. This is the one fully digital effect and composite that is in this film. It was a scene that was otherwise too difficult to pull off with a puppet, and which was too difficult to composite using a photochemical process. These variables made the decision to just do the entire thing on computer much easier. But speaking of compositing, most of that was still done photochemically. What wasn't, however, were the shadows the alien would cast on the walls and ceilings. There was no way the crew could capture the casted shadows and translate those onto the footage of live action sets. Drawing them in, on the other hand, was a rather convenient workflow, which is why they chose to do it.
I mean, it's so easy to do it digitally and so difficult to do it photochemically.
And I think that Alien 3 was still composited chemically, but I think we put shadows in of the alien creature onto the walls in CGI and computer.
Yeah, the shadow elements were, for the most part, CG with some roto help.
While Alien 3 might not have revolutionized digital production, it was quite a feat of its own to invent and implement various novel production techniques before the arrival of films like The Phantom Menace, Twister, or even Jurassic Park. And this gave an opportunity for other novel ideas that would soon be explored in the realm of digital animation and virtual production. Now, while this film had some interesting elements of visual effects and new technology showcased, for first-time director David Fincher, it was a hellish film to work on.
I remember going to see it and thinking, rather enjoying it, but equally...
Whatever.
No.
He recalled in an interview with the Digital Bits, Alien 3 was flawed from its inception, and it was certainly flawed, actually pretty up, well before we started shooting. So there you go, take all of the responsibility because you're going to get all of the blame. He also recalled being very naive to thinking Fox wouldn't release a film with their logo on it if it was a bad film. And also realized at the same time he should never have signed on to do Alien 3 without working on something else first, saying, "The lesson can be learned is that you can't take on an enterprise of this size and scope if you don't have a movie like The Terminator or Jaws behind you, because when everybody's wringing their handkerchiefs and sweating and puking blood over the money, it's very nice to be able to say, this is the guy who directed the biggest grossing movie of all time. Sit down, shut up, and feel lucky that you've got him."
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
For many scenes in a film, he would fight to get it the way he wanted, with a story of a 5-second shot taking almost 11 hours to film, all with crews grumbling and the studio execs looking over his shoulder.
Ask me what should have been done differently in the film. My only answer could be is to have trusted David Fincher's original vision. I think they would have liked it much more if it were David's movie.
Fincher did everything he could do to make the film he wanted, even as Fox would cut the shooting schedule down to 70 days from 93 days, and would reduce the special effects shots down to 25, less than half of Aliens. This, of course, brought chaos on set, working at times 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. And this Russian schedule likely caused an accident on set when an explosion backfired and 5 crew members were burned and 1 had to be taken to the hospital. After the film's release, Fox would try to assemble a director's cut of Alien 3 for home release, but Fincher refused to participate. Sigourney Weaver wrapped this all up nicely with a quote from Total Film in 2006 saying, "What was ironic was that Fox chose David Fincher, who was so talented, and from the second he got the job, they undermined him by not giving him what he was asking for. For me, it was a real education in how not to make a movie." At the end of the day, from the constant rewrites and studio heads not taking any idea seriously, the movie ended up being a complete mishmash.
Nonsense.
While watching the original cut of the film, you could almost feel the disorganized mess of a script and lack of a unified direction throughout the entire film. Even with a great cast and Fincher working as hard as he could to make a good film, it just wasn't enough. This isn't to say that there is not a good film in there, hiding among all the rewrites, edits, and hand-wringing of executives. But it's enough to make you wonder what this film could have been if any of the half-dozen visions of what it could be had come to pass. With Sigourney Weaver's character sacrificed at the end of this film, this felt like the conclusion to the Alien franchise, all wrapped up in a nice trilogy, until Fox came back for more, starting with a young screenwriter named Joss Whedon.